I was washing dishes after Thanksgiving dinner when my husband's niece said she wouldn't even be here if it weren't for this house. My stomach dropped. From the other side of the wall, my husband let out a laugh and said, "Yeah, she had nothing before me. They thought I was out of earshot." I dried my hands with a towel, holding back the sting, and stepped out without a word. 3 days later, the locksmith came and changed everything. I woke up before sunrise on Thanksgiving, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy with expectation. My husband, David, was still asleep, sprawled across the bed while I tiptoed around, already making a mental checklist. Turkey in the oven by 8, vegetables chopped and ready, rolls rising on the counter. I dusted shelves no one would ever notice, polished the glassware, even ironed the napkins because I wanted everything to look perfect. For years, it had become unspoken tradition that Thanksgiving was at our house. David's sister, Monica, always found an excuse not to host, and after their mother passed, the responsibility quietly shifted onto me. I never protested. Part of me liked it, being the one who made the table glow, who set out place cards with careful handwriting, who ensured everyone felt cared for. It made me feel like I belonged. By the time David finally stirred, the house was already alive with the smells of roasting turkey and cinnamon. He wandered downstairs in sweatpants, scratching his head, and poured himself coffee without so much as a glance at the chaos around him. "Smells good," he mumbled, scrolling through his phone as if the meal had appeared by magic. I swallowed the sting. That had become our pattern. Me rushing to hold everything together, him detached, offering small grunts of acknowledgement as if that were enough. Guests trickled in by noon. Monica arrived first, carrying a pie she'd clearly picked up from the grocery store but acting like it was some great effort. She gave me a once-over, the kind of look that felt more like evaluation than greeting, before breezing into the living room to join David. Then came his niece, Chloe, with her new boyfriend in tow. She looked polished and sharp, the kind of young woman who filled a room with easy laughter. I made sure their place settings looked just right, even added a little garnish to their plates. It mattered to me that the day felt special. The dining room filled with noise, clinking glasses, stories retold for the 10th time. I moved in and out of the kitchen, ferrying dishes, topping off drinks, making sure nothing burned. They laughed together in the living room while I scraped pans in the sink, but I told myself I didn't mind. Hosting was my way of being part of the family, even if I was more often in the background. When we finally sat down to eat, I let myself breathe for a moment. The table looked beautiful, candles glowing, food steaming in serving bowls. Everyone dug in, complimenting the turkey, the stuffing, the cranberry sauce. David nodded like he'd had anything to do with it. I smiled anyway because that's what I did. I smoothed the edges. By dessert, my feet ached and my head buzzed, but I kept moving, carrying plates back to the kitchen, starting the mountain of dishes that had already piled up. I could still hear them in the other room, voices rising and falling in waves of laughter. I felt invisible, but in a way, invisibility was easier. If they didn't see me, they couldn't criticize me. And that's when it happened. As I stood at the sink, warm water running over my hands, I heard Chloe's voice slice through the chatter. "She wouldn't even be here if it weren't for this house," she said, light and sharp, like she thought it was funny. My stomach nodded. David's reply came smooth, almost amused. "Yeah, she had nothing before me." They both laughed. I froze, plate in one hand, sponge in the other, while their words settled like shards of glass in my chest. The sound of their laughter lingered in the air, mixing with the clatter of silverware and the soft hum of voices drifting from the living room. I stood at the sink, hands still moving automatically. Rinse, scrub, stack, but my mind had gone blank. Chloe's words replayed like a cruel echo. She wouldn't even be here if it weren't for this house. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, sharp, careless, like tossing a match onto dry leaves. And then David's laugh. His agreement. That's what gutted me. He didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. He just played along, as if the entire foundation of our marriage could be reduced to a roof over my head. I didn't move. Couldn't. My chest felt tight, but my body kept going through the motions. A plate in one hand, sponge in the other, as if keeping busy could hold me together. The sink water steamed against my skin, but I barely felt it. I wanted to walk out right then, confront them, demand an explanation. But my tongue stayed heavy. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I rinsed another dish. And another. When the last plate was stacked on the drying rack, I wiped down the counters in slow, deliberate circles. Each motion steadied me, kept me from unraveling. Finally, I dried my hands on the dish towel, folded it neatly back on the hook, and walked into the living room. They were all there. Monica perched on the couch, Chloe giggling with her boyfriend, David leaning back in his chair like a king holding court. He didn't even notice me at first. When he finally glanced up, he gave me the smallest nod, like I was just the help passing through. "I think I'm going to lie down," I said quietly. "Headache." Nobody protested. Nobody asked if I was okay. Chloe smirked into her wine glass. David shrugged, already turning back to his sister. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavier than the last. In the bedroom, I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The laughter from downstairs carried faintly through the floorboards, but it felt like another world, one I didn't belong to, not really. That night, I barely slept. I lay stiff beside David as he snored, unbothered, like nothing had happened. My mind kept circling the same painful reel, every little joke he'd made at my expense, every story he'd told where I was the punchline, every time I convinced myself I was overreacting. Now I saw it clearly. I wasn't his partner. I was his convenience. By morning, I felt like a ghost in my own house. David shuffled into the kitchen, yawning, rubbing his eyes, pouring his coffee like it was any other day. I watched him for a long moment, waiting, hoping maybe that he'd notice the distance in my stare, the weight pressing down on me. But he didn't. He just scrolled through his phone, muttered something about needing to check the game scores, and left me standing there with silence swelling in my chest. That was it. Something inside me cracked, clean and final. I packed a bag. Not everything. Just a few clothes, toiletries, the essentials. My hands shook as I zipped it shut, not from fear, but from the sharp, cold clarity of knowing I couldn't keep living like this. For years I'd told myself I mattered because I hosted, because I kept the traditions alive, because I filled the gaps his family left empty. But what was the point of being indispensable to people who saw me as disposable? I texted my best friend, Mia. "Can I come stay with you for a while?" Her reply came within seconds, of course. "Get here now." The drive across town felt surreal. The streets were bright with holiday lights, families carrying leftovers in foil pans, kids laughing on sidewalks. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, holding back the ache of knowing I had just walked away from my own life. Mia welcomed me with open arms. She didn't ask for explanations, just set up her guest room, handed me a cup of tea, and said, "You don't owe anyone anything right now. Just rest." For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to collapse. I didn't call David. I didn't leave a note. Let him wonder. Let him fumble with his stories when the truth was silence. 3 days later, I met the locksmith at my front door. He was quick, efficient, friendly in the way strangers sometimes are when they sense something unspoken. With each turn of his tools, a lock clicked free, and something inside me shifted too. This wasn't triumph, it was exhaustion. But it was also mine. My choice. My boundary. When he handed me the new set of keys, I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the house I had built. The house they said wasn't really mine, the house they reduced me to. I slid the keys into my pocket and breathed in the cool November air. For the first time in a long time, I felt a thin line of space open up between me and the weight of their voices. David's calls came that night. At first, confusion. Something wrong with the lock? Then annoyance. Why would you change it without telling me? Then anger. Demands. Accusations. By the next day, guilt-tripping. You'd be nothing without me. You'd be sleeping on a couch if it weren't for me. I let every message pile up unanswered. His words used to sink hooks into me, make me doubt myself, make me bend to keep the peace. But now they slid off empty because I knew the truth. I wasn't the one who needed him. He was the one who needed me. And he had just lost me. At first, I thought changing the locks was the end. A line in the sand, a clean break. But leaving David was less like walking away from a fire and more like prying open a wall to find rot spreading through the beams. The more I looked, the more I realized how deep the damage ran. It started small. A letter from the bank arrived, addressed to both of us. I almost tossed it aside, but curiosity pulled me in. My stomach dropped as I read, a joint credit card, one I had never signed for, maxed out under my name. The signature scrawled across the application was mine, only it wasn't. David had forged it, bold as daylight. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in my hands, and felt the room tilt. All those late nights when he claimed he was working on finances suddenly made sense. My mind scrambled back through our marriage, replaying every time he'd told me not to worry about bills, that he had it under control. I pulled the laptop toward me, fingers flying. Bank statements. Withdrawals. Accounts I hadn't known existed. Page after page, the pattern revealed itself. Thousands gone to online betting sites, late-night cash advances, and, more recently, transfers into cryptocurrency wallets I didn't even know how to pronounce. It wasn't just gambling anymore. It was gambling dressed up as investing. Every click, every revelation hollowed me out further. My marriage wasn't just built on lies. It was financed by them. Then came the messages. I found them almost by accident, buried in the cloud backup he'd been too careless to secure. Text threads with a woman from his office, a coworker I'd met once at a holiday party. The kind of messages that start innocently, then grow late night, intimate, full of winks and innuendo. My hands shook as I scrolled, not because I was surprised, but because I realized how unsurprised I actually was. And as if that wasn't enough, Chloe's boyfriend reached out. A hesitant DM at first, then a phone call. His voice carried the weight of someone finally ready to unload a secret. He told me about Chloe and David, how they texted constantly, how she bragged about the expensive gifts he bought her, how he slipped her money behind everyone's back. Late-night messages that didn't read like uncle and niece. I sat on the edge of Mia's couch with the phone pressed to my ear, every word pouring another gallon of poison into a well already brimming over. The boyfriend apologized over and over, said he couldn't stomach it anymore, said he thought I deserved to know. I thanked him, my voice steady though my hands were clammy. When I hung up, I stared at the wall until the clock ticked past midnight. It all connected now. The smirks, the whispers, the way Chloe had mocked me so boldly at Thanksgiving dinner. She hadn't been worried about respect because David had already erased the boundaries. For years, I thought I was paranoid. Too sensitive. The butt of jokes I needed to learn to laugh at. But here it was in black and white. Forged documents, drained accounts, secret messages, hush-hush gifts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. It was humiliation carefully disguised as marriage. And beneath it all was David, smirking, laughing, so sure he'd never get caught. But he had no idea I was done being silent. The universe has a way of piling on when you least expect it. Just when I thought I had uncovered the worst of David's mess, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Hi. This might be strange, but my name is Tina. I used to be married to David. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it. The last thing I wanted was another wound opened up by the man I just cut out of my life. But something about her tone, polite, cautious, almost apologetic, made me answer. We met for coffee the next day. Tina walked in looking tired in a way I recognized instantly. Not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying weight that was never hers. She spotted me, gave a tentative smile, and sat down across from me like someone preparing to relive a nightmare. I'm sorry, she began, wrapping her hands around the mug. I don't mean to intrude. I just thought, you should know what you're dealing with. She didn't waste time. David had done the same thing to her, opened accounts in her name, drained joint savings, lied about debts. She'd spent years digging herself out of financial ruin while he strutted around acting untouchable. He had even tried to claim spousal support after their divorce, flipping the narrative to make her look like the one who abandoned him. Listening to her was like hearing my own story read back to me in another woman's voice. Every detail lined up. The forged signatures, The gambling, the smug laughter when she tried to confront him. The way he turned his family against her, painting her as unstable while he played the victim. Tina's eyes glistened as she spoke. He makes you doubt yourself. Makes you feel like you're crazy, like you're overreacting. But you're not. You're seeing him for who he really is. That's why I wanted to reach out. To tell you you're not alone, and you're not imagining it. I gripped my cup so tightly I thought it might crack. No one had ever said those words to me before. Not like that. I'd spent years swallowing my instincts, twisting myself into knots to keep the peace, to keep from being called sensitive or dramatic. But Tina's story was proof. It wasn't me. It had never been me. By the time she finished, I felt raw but steadier than I had in weeks. Like her experience had stitched together the loose threads of my own. I thanked her, my voice breaking, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You don't owe him another second of your life, she said. And don't be surprised when he tries to make you the villain. That's his pattern. But you have the truth on your side now. We sat in silence for a moment, two women bound by the same wound, the same man. And for the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of something that had been buried deep beneath all the betrayal. Resolve. I walked out of that cafe with Tina's number saved in my phone and her words echoing in my chest. David wasn't just careless. He wasn't just cruel. He was calculated. He was a parasite who drained anyone he could latch onto. And now, I wasn't just another host he could bleed dry. I was the one who finally saw him clearly. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, it was Monica's texts. Polite, sugar-coated concern. Hey, is everything okay? David's really worried. We just want to make sure you're safe. The kind of messages that pretended to be caring but carried an undercurrent of pressure. Answer us, explain yourself, fall back in line. When I didn't reply, the mask slipped. Her next message was sharper, almost scolding. I can't believe you'd put him through this. After everything he's done for you? You should be grateful, not petty. Grateful. That word lit me on fire. Grateful for what? For the forged accounts? For the lies? For the years I spent smiling while he chipped away at me behind closed doors? Then came Chloe. She didn't bother with fake kindness. She went straight to social media, posting vague but obvious digs. Some people can't handle a little joke. Some people forget who gave them a seat at the table. She went live once, laughing with her friends, tossing in snide comments about unstable wives who snap over nothing. And just like that, the narrative was rewritten. I became the cold, ungrateful woman who abandoned her poor, struggling husband. I was painted as jealous, insecure, humorless. A villain they could all rally against. David fed into it, of course. He told anyone who would listen that I was having a breakdown, that I was paranoid, unstable. He leaned on Monica, let her spread the message like wildfire. And most of them, family who'd eaten at my table, who I'd bent over backwards to welcome year after year, believed him. The isolation cut deeper than I expected. Even knowing the truth, even having the receipts, it hurt to see how quickly they turned, how eager they were to dismiss me. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. I started saving everything. Screenshots of Chloe's posts, Monica's messages, David's voicemails where his tone swung from begging to venom in seconds. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped defending. Because I realized something. I didn't need them to believe me. I just needed proof. And I was collecting plenty. I didn't speak to David for days. His calls, texts, and emails piled up, unread, unanswered. Instead, I turned my attention to the mountain of evidence he had left behind, piecing it together like a puzzle that exposed the truth I'd been too afraid to see. Bank statements, credit card notices, cryptocurrency transaction histories, screenshots of messages with Chloe and his coworker, and every vague social media post became part of a meticulously organized file. I knew I needed professional guidance, someone who could help me navigate not only the personal betrayal but the legal complexities. That's when I called attorney Rachel Mercer, a family law and financial fraud specialist. Claire wasn't just a lawyer. She was a strategist who spoke my language, translating the tangled web of deceit into actionable legal terms. Rachel explained step by step the actions we could take. First, we filed fraud reports with the relevant financial institutions, citing unauthorized credit activity, forgery, and identity theft. The forged credit card application under my name wasn't just a personal violation. It was a legal offense, a clear instance of financial fraud. Next, we contacted the banks and the credit bureaus, requesting fraud alerts and account freezes to prevent further misuse of my identity. Then we went further. Using the documentation I had collected, Rachel helped me draft a police report for forgery and financial abuse. We included timestamps of text messages, screenshots of digital transactions, and copies of the fraudulent credit card application. She emphasized that this wasn't just about protecting my finances. It was about establishing a paper trail for potential civil litigation and criminal investigation. Every piece of evidence mattered. Next came the restraining order. David had shown up at the house, pounding on the door, screaming, demanding access. Rachel filed a temporary protective order, citing harassment, intimidation, and potential threats to personal safety. I didn't answer him. Instead, I recorded the encounter from the hallway. Every shout, every emotional manipulation became admissible evidence in court. Rachel explained that these recordings could be introduced as proof of emotional abuse and harassment, strengthening my position for any future divorce proceedings, spousal support hearings, or asset disputes. I also worked with her to prepare for potential challenges to the house and assets. David had tried to make it appear that the home was jointly owned. Using the property deed, mortgage statements, and title documents, Rachel helped me create a clear record proving that the property was solely in my name, purchased with my finances, and that any claims he might attempt would be invalid under real property law and marital asset statutes. Meanwhile, we began building the case against his attempts to manipulate financial records. He had drained accounts, gambled large sums online, and even moved money into cryptocurrency wallets. Rachel explained that these transactions, if contested, could be classified as dissipation of marital assets, a concept courts use to determine unjust depletion of shared property or income. She also outlined potential civil remedies under fraudulent conveyance laws, which prevent a spouse from hiding or misusing funds to deprive the other of rightful ownership. At night, in the quiet of my temporary apartment, I finally let myself cry. Not for David, not for the marriage I had thought I had, but for the sheer exhaustion of surviving years of manipulation. For decades, years, I had bent myself into a shape that would keep the peace, keep him happy, and smooth over his lies to the family. Now I realized that bending wasn't just exhausting. It had been dangerous. But with Rachel's guidance, I felt a steady, almost meditative resolve. I wasn't just fighting to recover money or protect the house. I was building a legal fortress that ensured David couldn't touch me, couldn't manipulate the narrative, and couldn't harm my future prospects. Every report filed, every account frozen, every document authenticated became a piece of armor. I realized that leaving him wasn't enough. I needed the law on my side. I needed structure, precedent, and proof. Fraud, forgery, harassment, dissipation of assets, protective orders. Each term was a tool, a way to dismantle the carefully constructed illusion he had used to control me. And beneath it all, a quiet satisfaction began to stir. Not vengeance exactly, but the clarity that comes with knowing I was no longer a victim. I had not only survived, I was ready to hold him accountable, legally, financially, and socially. And for the first time in years, I felt the intoxicating power of knowing the truth was on my side. The day of the spousal support hearing arrived with a tension, so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, documents stacked neatly on the table before me, my palms calm despite the storm I knew was coming. Attorney Rachel Mercer had prepared every piece of evidence meticulously. The forged credit card applications, cryptocurrency transactions, gambling statements, screenshots of messages with Chloe and the coworker, and records of every harassment attempt. David walked in late, smug, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit, confidence oozing as if the court itself was on his side. Monica and Chloe lingered in the gallery, arms crossed, whispering to one another. But I didn't flinch. I had the law and the truth, and that made me untouchable. Rachel stood beside me, her tone steady as she outlined our case to the judge. She introduced evidence of financial fraud, forgery, and dissipation of marital assets. Each document was cataloged: bank statements, crypto transaction histories, and correspondence proving that David had repeatedly misused funds that were mine. Then she presented the communications with Chloe and the coworker, highlighting attempts to manipulate both personal and professional boundaries. The judge's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the screenshots, emails, and message threads. "Your Honor," Rachel said, "the respondent has engaged in ongoing financial abuse, harassment, and manipulation, including fraudulent credit accounts and unauthorized transfers into high-risk assets such as cryptocurrency. Furthermore, he has attempted to misrepresent ownership of marital property and assets to this court." David's lawyer sputtered, trying to interrupt, but the judge cut him off sharply. "All evidence must be considered," he said. "The court finds the documentation thorough and credible." Rachel moved on to the restraining order violations, showing the recording of David pounding on my door, yelling demands and threats. The courtroom remained silent, all eyes fixed on the screen as his own voice played back, swinging from pleading to rage in seconds. The judge noted the recordings as admissible evidence of harassment and intimidation, a serious consideration for both civil and potential criminal consequences. When it came to the spousal support claim, Rachel's strategy was precise. She highlighted that I had independently financed the house, managed my own business, and that all funds David attempted to claim were misappropriated through fraudulent means. She used legal terminology like marital asset dissipation, unauthorized financial transactions, and identity fraud to frame the argument in a way that left no room for his manipulations. The judge reviewed the documentation, asked pointed questions, and finally spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, there is no justification for spousal support. The respondent's claims are unfounded. Furthermore, the documentation shows repeated financial misconduct, forgery, and harassment." David's face went red. He opened his mouth, but the judge waved him silent. The respondent should consider himself fortunate that the petitioner maintained restraint while this case was being reviewed. But the legal consequences didn't stop at the courtroom. Rachel had also prepared a dossier for David's employer, detailing evidence of fraudulent financial activity and professional misconduct. His job had already been tenuous, low pay, unstable department, but after reviewing the documents, his HR department placed him on immediate leave pending internal investigation. Word spread quickly in his professional network. Forgery, financial abuse, and harassment are not just personal issues. They carry professional weight. By the end of the week, he was not only on leave but effectively unemployable in his field. No reputable firm would touch someone who had misused funds and lied about their financial status in multiple instances. Outside the courtroom, Monica stopped calling, Chloe disappeared from social media, and even casual family interactions evaporated. The narrative they had spun for years, the one where I was unstable, petty, or ungrateful, crumbled under the weight of documentation and legal scrutiny. Sitting in the car after the hearing, I felt a weight lift that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with truth. The law had sided with reality. My finances were protected, my property secure, and his credibility destroyed. For the first time in years, I realized something crucial. Survival wasn't enough. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my space, and my dignity. And that is exactly what I had done. The courtroom victory was only the beginning. Outside, the air felt lighter, but my mind was still heavy with the memories of years spent trying to appease, to forgive, to survive. David's absence, the silence from his family, the collapse of the false narrative, it was surreal. For once, I didn't have to explain myself, justify my actions, or defend my worth. The law had spoken, and the evidence was indisputable. Over the following weeks, I focused on reclaiming my life. The house, which had been the battleground, was now a sanctuary. I changed the locks once again, just for reassurance, and began reorganizing, not for guests or appearances, but for myself. Every corner I cleaned, every shelf I dusted, every room I arranged was an act of reclaiming space that had been controlled by someone else for too long. My business, which I had maintained while juggling the chaos of David's manipulation, became my center of focus. I audited every account, ensured taxes were correct, and rebuilt my credit to a place stronger than it had ever been. Rachel guided me through financial recovery measures, including disputing any lingering fraudulent charges, establishing fraud alerts with the credit bureaus, and creating safeguards against future misuse. Each step felt like repairing the scaffolding of my life, brick by brick. Tina, David's ex, became an unexpected ally. We shared stories, strategized ways to protect ourselves legally, and found a strange comfort in the knowledge that we had survived the same type of betrayal. Her experience gave me insight into the long-term patterns of abuse and reinforced the importance of remaining vigilant. As for David, the legal fallout was swift and merciless. His employer had terminated him after the internal review confirmed multiple financial discrepancies and ethical violations. His professional reputation, already shaky, was now irreparably damaged. Networking opportunities vanished. Colleagues who had once ignored his misconduct now openly distanced themselves. Even outside his career, his credibility within the family dissolved. Monica stopped messaging, Chloe deleted her social media, and the extended family's whispers fell silent. The web of deception he had relied on to manipulate and intimidate had unraveled completely. I spent time processing all of it: anger, relief, sorrow, and finally, clarity. There was no room left for guilt or self-blame. The years I had spent cooking, cleaning, and trying to maintain peace in his world had not been wasted. They had prepared me to recognize the signs, to gather evidence, and to fight back effectively. I also allowed myself to rest. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have to host a gathering to feel worthy. I didn't have to justify my choices to anyone. I explored old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and allowed my mind to breathe without constant tension. Thanksgiving of the next year came, and I spent it quietly at home with Mia, laughing over a simple meal we cooked together. There was no pressure, no hidden judgments, no shadows of lies behind the walls. Just warmth, friendship, and a sense of control I had almost forgotten existed. Looking back, the ordeal wasn't just about betrayal, theft, or humiliation. It was about reclaiming power over my life. David had underestimated me, my independence, my intelligence, my resilience. I didn't just survive his manipulation. I used the law, the facts, and careful documentation to protect myself and ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. The house, my business, my identity, all were intact. And for the first time in years, I was free to define my life entirely on my own terms. No one could diminish me, manipulate me, or rewrite my story again. I had lost fear. I had gained clarity. And in that clarity, I discovered something even stronger. I had my life back. Sitting in my quiet house, I finally felt the weight lift. The chaos, the betrayal, the lies, they were all behind me. What remained was clarity. I had survived. I had fought back, and I had won. Not just in court, not just in finances, but in reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. For years, I had bet myself to fit into a world that wasn't mine, trying to smooth over someone else's deception and please people who refused to see the truth. But now I realized that real strength isn't in enduring quietly. It's in recognizing the wrongs, documenting the facts, and asserting your rights. I thought about David, about Chloe, Monica, and even the whispers of the extended family. Their attempts to rewrite reality had failed. The law, the evidence, and my own resilience had ensured the truth was untouchable. And in that, there was a quiet satisfaction, less about revenge, more about justice and self-preservation. I spent the rest of that day unpacking, rearranging, making the space mine again. No one's expectations dictated how I would live. No one's lies could alter what I had built. My house, my business, my life. Everything was intact because I refused to be invisible, refused to be silenced. And as I looked around at the home I had earned and nurtured, I felt a rare, unshakable peace. This wasn't just freedom from him. It was a return to me, the woman who could survive, adapt, and rise stronger than before. I had been underestimated. I had been pushed to the edge. And yet, here I was, whole, empowered, and fully in control of my story.